Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, we find ourselves in the middle of an attempt to undermine the rights of the District of Columbia and its residents. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle consistently choose to focus on local DC matters instead of the problems facing the entire nation, like the cost of health care, addressing gun violence, and protecting reproductive rights and the LGBTQ community. However, if the majority is choosing to focus on elections in DC, I would be remiss not to bring up the voting rights of DC residents. The 700,000 residents of the District of Columbia lack the political representation given to Americans in all 50 states. So let's not beat around the bush. The failure to grant DC statehood is disenfranchisement of local communities, many of which are Black and brown. Plain and simple. Congress should never turn a blind eye to the voting rights of every person in this nation. That's why I am a proud co-sponsor of Congresswoman Holmes Norton bill, H.R. 51, which would grant D.C. statehood and which Democrats passed in the 117th Congress and will work to pass every session until it becomes law. In his testimony in 2021 before the Oversight Committee, Wade Henderson, the president of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, expressed strong support for DC statehood and the bill. He rightly observed that until DC has voting representation in Congress, and I quote, "the effort of the civil rights movement will remain incomplete." Ms. Weiser, do you think that the racial demographics of the district's residents have played a role in the campaign against their disenfranchisement?
Thank you very much for your question. I do agree that the disenfranchisement of the 700,000 residents of DC does disproportionately impact voters of color in America who disproportionately make up the bulk of DC's residents. And historically, the historical record is very clear that race discrimination was certainly played an important part in disenfranchising those citizens.
Thank you. DC statehood and home rule are matters of racial justice. If DC were admitted as a state, it would have the highest percentage of Black residents of any state. It is time for this majority to stop its selective interference in local politics and spend its time more wisely protecting the votes and voices of DC residents. It's time to make DC a state. And while we're at it, let's take long overdue action to protect the voting rights of all Americans.